When Wang Chut-king went to San Francisco to find work, he didn't expect to live in an overcrowded, unsanitary, neglected neighborhood. He didn't expect to barely have enough money to sustain himself, let alone support his family who were still in China. And he certainly didn't expect to be the indexed case of an outbreak of Yersinia pestis, also known as the Black Death. The San Franciscan government mismanaged the 1900 to 1904 outbreak of the Black Death in San Francisco's Chinatown by prioritizing profit over human life and the truth. This was exacerbated by the fact that the outbreak began in a community of Chinese immigrants, a highly marginalized group. This gross mishandling deprived the residents of California and the U.S. in general to their right to health care and not be endangered by their government. However, this story didn't begin in 1900. In 1848, a carpenter found a gold nugget in a river near his sawmill. By August of the same year, boom towns had boomed and every able-bodied person had struck out to strike it rich. The siren call of gold spanned continents, drawing a lot of immigrants, particularly from China. In this time, cholera reigned over the unsanitary tent towns, and overpriced civs like a strange god. This culture of people desperate for a better life at all costs nurtured corruption. In 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act barred Chinese immigrants from becoming American citizens. In this time, the press was the puppet for the government, and the government was the puppet for the railroad company. The stage has been set. It's time to introduce the actors. Joseph Kenyon was an accomplished bacteriologist rising through the ranks of the Marine Hospital Service, which would become the National Institute for Health. Walter Wyman was the Surgeon General and did many good things. He pushed for the creation of the International Sanitary Bureau, which would eventually become the Pan American Health Organization. However, Wyman had one rather particular habit. If he felt jealous of a subordinate, if they were outshining him, he would exile them to a nowhere town, effectively ending their career. As you might imagine, Kenyon was transferred swiftly to Angel Island with his family. Angel Island was the quarantine station that inspected all of the ships that were en route to San Francisco for disease and quarantined them as necessary. On March 6, 1900, the dying body of Wang Chut-king was brought to a coffin shop by his roommates. He had taken violently ill in his basement home, as is Chinese custom. His roommates brought him to a coffin shop to avoid having a death blight their living space. The coffin shop owner noticed the horrible symptoms of plague and called a police surgeon, who called a city health officer, who called Wilfred Kellogg, a city bacteriologist, to take a sample of the fluid in the bubo in order to get a laboratory diagnosis. The city health office did not want to let this become an epidemic, so they, not knowing that Black Death is spread primarily via infected blood in fleas that are carried by dying rats, instituted a slapdash quarantine and an even more slapdash sanitation attempt, resulting in an ineffectual cordon and feelings of oppression from the people inside it. 3 days later, the city health department lifted the quarantine. All of this was happening while Wilfred refused to positively identify the sample as containing a plague, handing the sample off to Joseph Kenyon instead. Kenyon gave the positive ID on March 11th. On March 15th, another person died, followed by more deaths over the next few days. Despite these deaths, the press and the governor vehemently denied the presence of plague and slandered anyone who said otherwise. The president of the San Francisco Health Board launched a cleanup effort that still wasn't centered on rat population control. Instead, their efforts centered on spraying chemicals such as sulfur and various bleaching agents. These chemicals are extremely harmful, but the people spraying them didn't care. They just wanted the problem to go away. After this month-long sanitation campaign, they were sure that the plague was gone. They were wrong. On April 24th, another person died, and the next month 4 more people died. This concerned Kenyon quite a lot, so he had Wyman wrangle it so that there was enough plague vaccine for the whole of Chinatown. Sadly, this other very helpful pillar of outbreak response was compromised by racism and fear. The residents of Chinatown believed that the vaccine was an attempt to poison them. On top of that, there were the mixed messages from the government. both that there wasn't any plague, and also you need to take a vaccine to protect from the non-existent plague. The residents of Chinatown actively hid bodies because they felt like they couldn't trust their government. After all the poor treatment they had received, they didn't believe that the plague wasn't just an excuse to further isolate and oppress them. Kenyon played his last, most desperate card. He made it so that anyone who wanted to travel outside of San Francisco would need a clean bill of health. This would be a good, helpful thing to do if he didn't ensure that white people could get a clean bill of health easily, whereas Chinese people needed a full examination and get vaccinated for it to even be considered. The Chinese Six Companies were 6 Chinese-owned companies who came together to represent the interests of Chinatown. They filed a restraining order that barred Kenyon from doing anything else regarding the outbreak of plague. Considering all of their allegations against him were correct, the order was granted. Was the restraining order a good thing? People were still dying. Meanwhile, Wyman was negotiating with various companies, making a deal that would mean that the companies would fund a plague response if the health service stopped talking about it. The deal went through. In early April, Kenyon was pushed farther from the life he once knew. He was being transferred to Detroit and out of the public eye. Kenyon was a racist. He subscribed to the racist pseudoscientific belief that only Chinese people could get the plague. This meant he could never launch a successful outbreak response because he didn't understand how the plague spread. He wasn't a hero. He was just the only person working on the outbreak that wouldn't take bribes. Everything he had ever done was tinged with the sickly stain of his belief. With his absence, every factor for a successful outbreak response snapped right into place. California elected a new governor who was more willing to support a rational plague response. One Rupert Blue was put in charge of the anti-plague campaign. He had a friendly demeanor and a disintegrating marriage, but most importantly, he understood that plague was spread through rats. His campaign was based on building trust in the community, healing the scars left by years of distrust of the medical profession. Blue had a lab in Chinatown and a reward posted for any dead rats brought to him that tested positive for plague. This was an extremely successful tactic, with over 3,000 rats taken off the street through this program. He also improved the city's infrastructure by rat-proofing homes and businesses, which led to changes in the tenant-landlord relationships in the area, putting more of the responsibility for the upkeep and safety of properties to the landlords. On February 24th, 1904, the last person died of plague in this outbreak. Blue's work was not done. There were still rats with plague about. Once the rat bounty program took hold, rats started to flee to the forests surrounding San Francisco, where the fleas they carried found a new host: squirrels. Blue swiftly pivoted his efforts to squirrel killing. As Blue and the trappers he hired learned, it is a lot harder to hunt squirrels than it is to hunt rats. A fair amount of squirrels with plague were killed, but not all. To this day, people still get plague from its reservoirs: squirrels, prairie dogs, and rats. Luckily, plague is easily treatable today with the basic antibiotics. This outbreak cost 119 people's lives. We talk about the government like it is a monolith, and not an institution made up of human people who are flailing to the grave just like all of us. These humans were doing their best, but their best just happened not to be enough to save the people around them. Their humanity does not excuse their actions. These people saw their fellow humans as expendable. This pattern has gone on throughout history. We saw this with AIDS and COVID, and it will happen again. Their negligence was 119 people's doom, and it could be our doom as well.